On behalf of the board of the Clinton County Historical Association, we're pleased to be able to be here to provide this presentation for you, to you. I would like to also thank the chapel for allowing us to have it here, and thank you for all who have donated. I noticed some have, because they really they have to keep the lights on just like any other not-for-profit, and they did not charge us, so we're just asking everybody to maybe contribute on the way out if they didn't contribute on the way in, so thank you very much. We're proud, the CCHA is very proud to be working with the Spitfire Discovery Team. And tonight we have a number of special guests, and I notice a lot of them are in the audience, so thank you all for coming. But tonight, Daniel McKay is with us. He's the New York State Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer. And I'm going to turn the program over to him, and he's going to introduce our guest speaker.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this evening. It's a pleasure to be up from Albany. I've got some other business in the North Country over the next 2 days, and this is a great way to kick that trip off. So I am Daniel McKay. I do serve as Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation. I serve on the executive staff at New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. I do serve as Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, which is sort of the federal designation that acknowledges my and our office's responsibilities under the National Historic Preservation Act, passed in 1966. We are a nation-leading office. We are a nation-leading state in terms of historic preservation activities, and I have one of the great jobs in state government. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Art Cohn this evening. I've known Art for a number of years, dating back to his captaincy of the schooner-rigged replica sailing canal vessel Lois McClure. I was able to join him on 2 voyages across the Erie Canal corridor with that vessel. I have admired his skill sets and his professional diversity, his expertise and his approaches and his approachability, his worldwide professional network, and his commitment to the Lake Champlain region and his home community. The list of what he has not done in life may be shorter than the list of what he has accomplished. I am appreciative of the many ways my professional life has been able to intersect with Art, someone far more adventurous and pioneering than I. While the focus tonight is on Lake Champlain, I want to share that Art is equally informed and similarly accomplished in his marine archaeology documentation in New York's Finger Lakes region, where a trove of Erie Canal boats from every era of canal operations, 1825, 1835, and 1918, is being uncovered transect by transect in Seneca Lake. Among his many varied qualifications, he has a law degree, he is a professional dive instructor with numerous additional technical certifications, including cave diving. He is a licensed merchant marine officer, qualified for towing commercial loads up to 100 tons, should you need. A historian, an author, a professor, documentary film writer, and producer. He has been a UNESCO delegation member. He is a certified tree farmer, a chaplain, and yet he has not forgotten how to cuss when necessary. Each and every one of those skills, accreditations, experiences, and perspectives is fundamental to informing his long-recognized leadership in pursuing the discovery of the gunboat Spitfire, and his long-standing commitment to assessing and pursuing the appropriate path forward for evaluating and informing the conservation approach for this unique resource. When I meet up with Art on the water, I have always brought lemons. We can't let a busy, informed, groundbreaking career be sunk by the mariner's scourge of scurvy. So I welcome him to the podium with this handoff and hope you too fall under the spell of his expertise and his aspirations that will be shared this evening. So Art.
That was the best introduction I've ever had. Thank you. Thank you. I'm protected now. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you. I want to thank the Clinton County Historical Association and its president, Jerry, and director, Helen, for not just welcoming me for this talk, but also really providing the institutional structure here in Plattsburgh to begin to think about is there a logic and a wisdom and a value to be served by trying to preserve this boat by recovery? It's a big question. I'm not suggesting we have all the answers. At this point, I would suggest that a lot of what we've determined and looked at are concepts. And some of those concepts are still unproven and need further research, and we need to do our due diligence to do that. And so it's an ongoing process, but I think we are making progress. And so tonight I'm here really just to, I was in this room 7 years ago to announce our first level of concepts, of thoughts about how we best preserve this boat. As has been said, I was part of the team that discovered the Spitfire 27 years ago. And unlike probably your imagination, which had you thinking that, oh, on the day he discovered the boat, they were jumping all over the place and opening the champagne, and I can tell you it was the opposite of that. It was a sobering reality that a new child had been born into my life that had to be taken care of, managed, and grown through time in the best possible way we knew how to do that. At a time when I started my professional diving career, which I was a salvage diver for a long time, historic shipwreck management was not really a field on the radar. It was typically, if you found it and it was interesting and you thought you could recover it, rip it out of the bottom. If you thought you could make some money out of it, clean up the interior and sell the trinkets. And so we've come a long way since then, and I've been, one of my passions has been to try to deal with that issue. What value do these things have to society? How do we best preserve them for future generations, as opposed to exploit them for the one-time thing? And so the Spitfire is really right in the middle of an evolving societal issue. Who gets to manage these shipwrecks? Who gets to make the decisions about these shipwrecks? And how do we best preserve them for this and future generations? And so I will be talking a little bit about that. I'll be talking about the historic context for what we get to live in Lake Champlain, in our Champlain Valley region. We are the beneficiaries of an extraordinary legacy of American history, pre-American history, commercial history, because we just live in this extraordinary place with this extraordinary superhighway just to the east of us from here. When I was trying to put my mind around what it was I wanted to say here tonight, the word that kept coming up to me was the concept of remembering. You know, as a society, we do a lot of remembering. We're always going to remember 9/11. Well, I've been remembering 9/11 since 9/11. That's when I joined the fire department. And every year, the number of people who come out to remember 9/11 is smaller. And so there are just some things that I've observed. How many of you know that this chapel was built to remember the war dead that died in World War I? So sometimes over time, these things get a little bit fuzzy. Sometimes they get lost. And so I don't think you recover a boat to remember that. I think you recover a boat if it's the right thing to do for the resource, first and foremost, what's best for the shipwreck, and how do we manage it to maximize its public value. It's a public resource. And so that's really where I begin. We have this extraordinary legacy of history on Lake Champlain. I'm going to very quickly go through this. I apologize. Some stuff I'll do in some detail, and some stuff it'll be cliff notes. Some stuff that you maybe really enjoy, I'll leave out altogether. So there's some questions and discussion afterwards. I'm happy to try to fill that in. But in the meantime, I'll start with the beginning. The American Revolution, the fighting war, began on April 19th at Concord and Lexington. This is the oldest known image from that period, taken by men who had come up from Connecticut after they heard about Concord and Lexington. One was an engraver, one was a painter, and some months later, they advertised 4 engravings for sale of the original event that launched the revolution. The paintings have disappeared, so these engravings are the oldest known thing. Ironically, those 2 guys had come up under the command of the militia officer Benedict Arnold from Connecticut. So Benedict Arnold is going to be ever present in my discussions today. Very quickly, I call Lake Champlain a superhighway. That's why we're here. We're here, we've got all this incredible maritime history that, you know, looking out there today, it's beautiful. Look at the sunsets if you're in Vermont, and I do. It's an extraordinary environment to be in. But in the day, it was part of the interconnected superhighways, St. Lawrence to the Hudson River, and everywhere in between, that allowed men, commerce, and armies and navies to move. It had strategic value, and that's why we get to have this rich legacy of American history in our backyard. The shots that were fired, that were heard around the world, happened on April 19th. 21 days later, Ethan Allen with the Green Mountain Boys seizes Fort Ticonderoga in what has been characterized as the first offensive action taken against the British. I don't think it was this swashbuckling, sober look. We have actually the narrative of what Ethan Allen was supposed to have said to the officer he took, and even though I do curse from time to time, I will not repeat it to you tonight. What is usually lesser known and sometimes intentionally not spoken of is that with Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, in a shared command that was hateful, they hated each other, but they shared the command, taking Fort Ticonderoga. This was where Benedict Arnold shows up. He's got a servant with him and troops on the way, but he's got no military guys. He's got a piece of paper that says he's got a commission from the Massachusetts Committee of Public Safety. But his activities are really important. One of the things he did, he had sent a small group on there. When you come up, go by Skenesboro. Skene, I'm told, has a big sloop that, you know, we might be able to use. So get it from him, take it from him. And so it has given me one of the really profound moments that I periodically, when I first read this, I had to stop and really just think about it. And now I try to present it to kids, school groups, and anybody who'll listen to me. Because on May 11th, the same day that they're taking Fort Ticonderoga and Mount Independence, and Crown Point, this boat was captured from Skenesboro, now Whitehall, and Eleazar Oswald kept a journal, and he was the officer in charge, Arnold's man. And he wrote this one-liner. We set sail from Skenesborough in a schooner belonging to Major Skene, which we christened Liberty. I just think that's important. I think that's profound as I read other things written throughout the Revolution and beyond. When I hear people talking today, that concept is still talked about. It's really important. I'm not saying I fully understand everything it means, but I think it's one of the things we need to be thinking about. And then Benedict Arnold, one of the skills in Benedict Arnold's bag of tricks was he was a mariner. And he realized that Lake Champlain was a superhighway. If you control it, you control a really important thing. And so he knew there was only one other large boat on Lake Champlain. There was Skene's vessel, and there was the King's sloop up at St. John. And so as soon as the Liberty showed up, along with some bateau, he puts some of his men who showed up, and they go north to seize the King's sloop at St. John, the northern end of navigation on Lake Champlain. And they're successful. They surprise. The British don't know there's a revolution on yet. It's that early. And so they surprise those guys. They take the boat. They take any cannon laying around. They get any boat that they can put men on, that they can move away. They capture everything they can capture and burn the rest. And they're on their way back to Ticonderoga when Benedict Arnold writes, very important, 10 days after he takes Fort Ticonderoga, he's back at Fort Ticonderoga, and he writes, "I am under no apprehension from the enemy, as we are masters of the lake." So it wasn't pretty back then. It was strategic. And if you control the lake, you control the fortunes of war. And actually, Arnold was not shy. He said, "We control the lake, let's use it." He writes to Congress, "Let's invade Canada. We've got the lake, let's go." And meanwhile, George Washington in Boston was thinking the same thing. Why don't we invade Canada? Well, it turns out that that's just what they did. In the summer and fall of 1775, we invaded British Canada. I like this map because it mostly shows Arnold. Arnold, I don't want to burst your bubble about Arnold, but you know, Arnold was a very contentious man. He fought with everybody. You couldn't be in a room with him without getting on his bad side. So of course, that's what happened at Fort Ticonderoga. He had to leave in a huff, goes down to Boston. That's when he meets for the first time George Washington. And George Washington is already talking about the possibility of sending a force through the Maine and Canadian wilderness to surprise the British at Quebec City. And Arnold shows up and he says, "I'm the guy you want to send to do that." And Washington is convinced that he was. And that was where their relationship, which lasted as younger brother and older brother for 5 years, Washington was Arnold's chief defender until the end. And so Arnold is going to take this group to Quebec, but there's going to be an army that's going to use our strategic Lake Champlain, and it's a great story. General Richard Montgomery is second in command to Philip Schuyler. Philip Schuyler gets sick, so the command falls on Richard Montgomery. He's a British officer in early life, resigned his commission, came to this part of the world, married a wonderful woman in the Hudson Valley, has a farm there, he's living the life. But when the revolution breaks out, he's drawn in. And he's a patriot. He believes in the cause. And so he signs up, he's willing to take a commission as a brigadier general. And as a brigadier general, taking over for Schuyler. He's leading this force, this ragtag force. He writes about it. It's really the formative days, no discipline. Each province hates the other province, won't have anything to do with them but fighting. It's really like herding some bad cats. And so here, this is one of the great establishing maps of the siege of St. John. So the British are in St. John. They hold St. John, and they've got several hundred professional troops. They've got some redoubts, they've got cannon. They're building boats to retake Lake Champlain, because right now Arnold's got the only two big boats, and so they've got to do that. And so there's this multi-week, several-month siege that happens at St. John. While that happens, Chambly gets captured by the Americans. And so at St. John is where the action is going to be, and it stays that way until November, when the Americans are successful and the British army that's holding St. John surrenders. What's interesting about this map is that it was drawn by Lieutenant John Andre, who becomes much more involved in the Benedict Arnold story on the other end. But the fact that he was here and present is a remarkable. History has lots of connections. And this is one of the ones when I realized that, I was like, you got to be kidding me. That John Andre was here, did the map, and what I was able to do is I compared it with another map that we knew he did, and it's the same hand. Well, so now Arnold is making his way. It's one of the great sagas of the Revolution. I can't spend all night talking about it, but we could. Kenneth Roberts' March to Quebec. It's one of the really extraordinary things to read about, to understand why were they doing this. The intense sacrifice of this group is worthy of trying to understand. The two armies finally meet in front of Quebec in early December 1775. General Montgomery is in charge. Arnold is second in command. What do? It's December. What's it like in December in front of Quebec? Did they plan for that? No. Do they have supplies? No. Are they dependent on the Canadians to, feed them and keep them warm and all of that? Yeah. And so it's kind of working, but there's a clock ticking, because their limited army, which is combined about 1,000 men, most of their enlistments run out on New Year's Day. And so the two commanders decide, well, heck, let's wait for that big snowstorm, and while we still have an army, we'll attack. And they create a plan of attack and a plan for feints and all of that. And wouldn't you have it, on December 31st, they get the northeaster that they needed, and the two armies, the two wings of the army, Arnold leading a wing and Montgomery leading a wing, different parts of the town begin their movement into the system. And the British are only barely ready to receive them. They've got a lot of militia, they've got a lot of townspeople, they have some professional soldiers, but they're thin. And so it's one of those things that really, they almost pulled it off. They pulled off everything till then, and that was a miracle. So now they're looking for their last miracle so they can take Quebec City, which was the last British stronghold in North America. And they're running around. Benedict Arnold is leading. These guys led from the front. Benedict Arnold is leading. They're getting shot out. All of a sudden, Benedict Arnold's on the ground. He's shot in his leg. Can't move. Has to be taken from the field. His men are not that anxious about continuing to attack with Arnold gone. But the worst thing was yet to happen, and that was in the other advance, which was memorialized in John Trumbull's Death of Montgomery. Here, Montgomery, leading from the front with all of his officers, is going down a narrow street that has some houses that are manned by defenders, one of which has a very small cannon in it. And they're going to flee, but before they flee, they touch off the cannon. And that cannon, sending grape shot down a narrow street, kills Montgomery outright, kills almost all of his other officers. The only officer of his that survived was Aaron Burr, who, a very small man, attempted to carry his deceased commander away, and he couldn't. It was just the physical activity was too much. So this attack also failed. So word gets back to Congress 3 weeks later. Think about the communications in those days. It's winter. They've just had this horrible setback. Montgomery is killed, Arnold is wounded, and the word gets back to Congress in 3 weeks that this disaster has happened. And this is what Congress does. They vote on January 25th to establish a monument to remember Richard Montgomery. And Benjamin Franklin is drafted to write the inscription and to hire the sculptors. They were the sculptors to the King of France. And they did create the monument. And that monument says, "This monument is erected by order of Congress, 25th January, 1776, to transmit to posterity a grateful remembrance of the patriotism, conduct, enterprise, and perseverance of Major General," he was promoted posthumously, "of Major General Richard Montgomery, who after a series of successes amidst the most discouraging difficulties fell in the attack on Quebec 31st December 1775, aged 37 years. And Montgomery, who had written a whole series of letters to his wife, Janet, I mean, when you read the letters, you realize, he says, there's nothing I want to do more than get out of here. There's nothing I want to do more than leave these contentious troops who are terrible with discipline and barely, willing to follow my orders. All I want to do is come back to you and the farm and the life that we live. But my honor and my commitment is a real thing. And so I will stay until I can come back to you with my honor preserved. And so, I think that's important to know. So here it is. It's so think about it. They had no plan for January 1st. Their plan was, we're going to seize Quebec City and see what we got. Now they've lost their two commanders. Arnold is not dead, but he's wounded and is in a hospital. And the men now, they're just trying to survive. Remember, there was no plan. There was no supply line. There was no food, heat, shelter. That all had to be now. I guess we're going to be here for a while. It's appropriate for us to say, well, why were they there? The guys who stayed, why were they there? What was it they were thinking they were doing? How did they survive? And so they largely froze, they largely starved, and then it got bad because they got sick with smallpox. And smallpox was really, it was a terrible thing. And then it got worse again because in May, if they were there through the winter and they were still there, They hadn't left and they hadn't died. They were still there in May. Then they got to see, coming from the mouth of the St. Lawrence, the largest, earliest relief convoy of British military ships that ever came to Quebec City. And they're sitting there watching these fresh professional troops on real boats with prefabricated boats in their hull, bringing it to fight on the lakes. And from that moment on, you can imagine, it was a retreat. And so from Quebec City, down these superhighway waterways, down into Lake Champlain. It wasn't as quick and easy as I'm portraying, worth reading about, but I will stop for 1 minute, and I will stop here at Illinois. Now, one account I have says Arnold was the last man to leave Quebec, the last man to leave St. John. He pushed the last bateau off with his hands, stripped the accoutrements from his horse, shot it in the head so that the British couldn't use it, and got into the boat and the army came as far as Illinois, because here they were safe. Why were they safe? Because the British were coming, but they didn't have boats. You can't get a boat, a big boat, from the River Sorel, or the Richelieu River as we know it now, into Lake Champlain because of the rapids at Chambly. And so the Americans know that if they can get out of St. John into a place where the British can't catch them, they're going to be at least able to catch their breath. And they do. They do it at Illinois. And I want to just read you some observations. These are the words of the guys who were there. They're not my words. And I think it's important to remember that this is what they saw and this is what they experienced. So this is from the Journal of Bays Wells, who became a lieutenant on the gunboat Providence that fought in the Battle of Valcour Island. He describes 1,500 sick men. Oh, the groans of the sick, what they undergo I can't express. Neither is it in the power of man to give any idea of the distress of them laying on the ground, nothing to cover them but the heavens and wet, cool weather. One of the doctors, Dr. Samuel Merrick, wrote, "Great numbers could not stand, calling on us for help, and we had nothing to give them. It broke my heart, and I wept till I had no more power to weep." And then the campaign of 1776, the struggle for control of Lake Champlain, the Americans trying to keep it, the British, the Royal Navy, the finest navy in the world, trying to take it back. It's an arms race, and Lake Champlain is in the middle of it. At Skenesboro, where the Liberty had been seized, Benedict Arnold superintends the shipyard that's established there and directs that they build flat-bottom gunboats and row galleys, the two boats that became the backbone of the fleet. And this is what it might have looked like. I think these dioramas are really aces, and I apologize, I don't remember. This is at the Skenesboro Museum at Whitehall. It's first class, and I apologize, I don't have the person's name to credit him, but it's really extraordinary, and it's accurate. It allows you to put yourself there. Now the British, not to be outdone, they were smart. They could only go as far as Chambly. They couldn't bring a big boat into Lake Champlain. So Arnold and the people calculating advantage figured, well, you know, we got the boats we captured last year, we got the new ones we're building. We're really not going to have to face the British in an actual battle because there's no way they can even get close to what we have. They won't come down. But in the meantime, they had some really ingenious mechanics in their ranks. Lieutenant John Shank was the master, And what he devised is you could take existing boats, already operational boats, bring them to the upper end of the Chambly Basin where the rapids were. You could disassemble the parts down to the lower bottoms, put the bottoms on axles, take those with draft power along the side of the rapids, you don't have to be in the rapids, and reassemble them much more quickly than if you try to build a boat from scratch. The Americans didn't really fully know this or believe it when they got word that that's what was happening. And so the British really were fielding a superior fleet, and Arnold didn't know it. Because Benedict Arnold, after giving direction to the shipyard, becomes one of the officers of the fleet. He's actually the number 2 guy. Till the new number 2 guy crosses his path, they get into a big argument. Arnold has him arrested and sent south. Arnold is now the Commodore of the American fleet. And these 2 fleets are going to meet here, out here, between Valcour Island and the mainland on October 11, 1776. This painting was done in 1776 by a British painter who was not there, but who was speaking to the guys who were. And their stuff is unbelievably accurate. This is a painting by a man named Henry Gilder. It's part of the Queen's collection in Windsor Castle, and we use it with their gracious permission. And it really does set the stage. So the British are coming down from the north with a north wind. There's some question about whether they actually know Arnold is there or not. This is the American fleet up here. The British knew they were there. They sailed down the outside of Valcour Island with the wind. They turn in. And of course, the wind that brought them is now not helping them get up to bring their boats to bear to fight. Early in the engagement, and now I want to give you some words from Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold, the commander of the fleet, wrote 2 letters while on retreat after the battle, but from the deck of a boat. And this is the first one. So he says, you see there's a highlighted boat up here on the shoreline? The schooner Royal Savage, by some bad management, fell to leeward and was first attacked. One of her masts was wounded and her rigging shot away. The captain thought it prudent to run her on the point of Valcour, where all the men were saved. The enemy boarded her at night and set her on fire. Very important. Then he writes in the same letter, the Philadelphia was hulled in so many places that she sank about 1 hour after the engagement was over. The whole killed and wounded amounts to about 60. That's 10% of the American crews. Then we have, this is the what's called the Faden map, William Faden, also created in 1776. And we know now from our work at Valcour Island, highly accurate, very accurate. And so you get tons of detail. The American fleet, the British fleet, the position of the British boats, the Royal Savage up on the rocks, annotated, and then this really handy dotted line that tells us that the Americans had a council. They don't say they had a council of war, but they did. They had a council of war. And Arnold writes, on consulting with General Waterbury and Colonel Wigglesworth, it was thought prudent to retire to Crown Point, every vessel being their ammunition being nearly 3/4 spent. So 10% casualty, 3/4 of their ammunition gone. And there they go, single file, past the British blockade set up to stop them. The American fleet is trying to escape so they can fight again. It's one of the really remarkable maritime maneuvers of the war, in my opinion. It's really, a lot of people don't believe that Arnold could have done this. That there must have been, he must have gone around the north end of the island or what have you. But remember, Arnold observed that a British crew went on the Royal Savage that night and set it on fire. Well, think about that. It's freezing. It's October, middle of October. It's freezing at night. You're in a strange country in a strange land. And there's a warm fire. You ever walk into a room with a fireplace? You're kind of drawn into that, whether you can feel the heat or not. And I believe the British created their own diversion that allowed Arnold and his men to escape and pull it off. And then we have this episode, interpreted by Ernie Haas. Many of the paintings I use are Ernie Haas creations. Arnold wrote on the 15th to Philip Schuyler, "The Washington and Congress were in the rear on the retreat. The rest of our fleet was ahead, except for 2 gondolas, which we sunk at Schuyler's Island." So what he's telling us is 2 of the gunboats were so badly shot up that they had tried to get them back to the base, but they couldn't, and so they were abandoned. It turns out those 2 gondolas were the gondola Jersey, which did not sink, but was found the next day by the British awash, afloat. And they got on it, pumped it out, made it one of their warships. But the second gunboat, whose name we did not know, presumably went to the bottom, because when we started our work, we could not fully account for it. We knew the Philadelphia was raised, we knew we could do the math, but we didn't know the name of the boat that might still be at the bottom. We know now that that boat was the Spitfire. And so the British continue to chase. 2 days later from the original battle, October 13th, they catch up with Arnold's rearmost vessels. They surround the galley Washington. It's forced to strike its colors. Arnold realizes he cannot sustain the engagement. They're better sailors, they're better armed, they're better crewed. And his boats are totally shot up. His men are injured, not sleeping, not eating. It's a bad situation. So he elects to take his rearmost 5 boats that he knows are not going to make it. And he brings them into a small Vermont bay. This is the only place I've ever seen Ferris's Bay actually annotated. Peter Ferris, the original settler of Panton, lives there right on the edge of the water in this little protected bay, and Arnold knows him, and they pull in, ground their boats, keeps his flag still flying in defiance of the British, who are tacking back and forth the mouth of the bay and firing on him, and he orders his ships blown up to deny them to the British. And he pulls it off. And then he escapes overland with about 200 surviving crew, and he lives to fight again. Now, the Americans, including Arnold, get back to Ticonderoga and a new fortification on the Vermont, the eastern shore, they're calling it Mount Independence. And they realize that the British are going to go to Crown Point. The Americans have abandoned Crown Point. The British are staging there, and they know this is going to be it. The British are going to attack. We've got to get ready for them. The guns that could be mounted aren't mounted, whereas the militia, we need to get ready for this. And it's a desperate set of letters and journals and writings. And one day in early November, somebody says, hey, I was sent up to do a scout at Crown Point, and they're all gone. What? The British have made a decision. Sir Guy Carleton, the man in charge of the British forces, says, hey, you know what? It's November. I'm not sure exactly what he said. Getting cold. Montreal's a lot nicer place. We've got control of the lake. We've accomplished our mission. Let's go back to Montreal for the winter. Let's plan, and we'll come down in the spring of 1777, and we'll show these guys what's what. In the winter, one of the great events happens from a nautical archaeologist point of view. Fort Ticonderoga, Mount Independence. You know, it's winter time. There's a small skeleton crew being left to defend these two fortifications. We want to make sure they got something to do. Let's ask them to build a bridge on the ice that will span the two fortifications and make it possible to move forces back and forth. Seems like a good idea. It was hard, and they had problems. And they had 22 caissons, which are log cabin towers. And the Journal of the Engineer still exists. Unfortunately, it's not very descriptive. Working on ye great bridge. Yeah, what are you doing? Anyway, so they did. They built it, and they got it operational, not by the final design. The final design was for a fixed bridge. They have a floating bridge secured to these caissons. I did not prepare to talk about this tonight, so I can only tell you that our crew found there's 22 caissons described from John Burgoyne's spies. We found 21 of them, and we can account for the one that's missing. Still on the bottom of Lake Champlain. Okay, so now it's the campaign of 1777. John Burgoyne is leading the British force. Why? Because Sir Guy Carleton, who made the decision to go home, got a world of trouble for it. He was second-guessed by all the command in London, and John Burgoyne, who had gone back to England for the winter, was very enthusiastic about pointing out the mistakes that Sir Guy Carleton had made, and miraculously they gave John Burgoyne command of this independent army to invade from Canada. Now that you control the invasion route, you know, it'll be a walk in the park. We'll give you every gun, everything you need, put the army together. The army was already here from the previous year, and Burgoyne is, if you read his writings at this time, he's cocky. There is no doubt of the outcome of this really somewhat uneven contest. And it gets a little funkier because the American in charge had been Philip Schuyler, but Horatio Gates managed to maneuver Schuyler out, and now Gates is in charge of the Northern Army, stationed at Fort Ticonderoga. Then he falls back into Saratoga. And Horatio Gates, not to go into detail that'll keep you here all night, Horatio Gates had been Arnold's commander in 1776 for the Valcour Island fleet. He was based in Ticonderoga. Arnold wrote to Gates almost every day. This is what I need, this is what's happening, this is what I think is going on. Gates would write back, whatever you say, Benedict, you're the man. You know this Navy stuff. You're doing a great job. I mean, this is really super. And they were absolute allies and buddies in 1776. 1777, not so much. Because when they both arrive at Saratoga, the Americans have fallen back, been pushed back toward the Hudson River, which is where this British force was aiming, and Gates is in charge. Arnold shows up. He's going to be number 2. They sit around at a meeting in the command tent, and I don't know exactly what was said, although we can piece it together pretty well, but I can simply characterize it as Gates saying something like, I think the world is flat. And Arnold saying, you stupid guy, it's not flat, it's round. I don't believe you said that. That's really stupid. What? What did you call me? And so these guys got to a point of contention where they could not work together. There were two battles of Saratoga. At the first battle, Arnold was in charge of the left wing, the most prestigious command in the army, and he did remarkable work. The battle was essentially a draw. They fall back. The argument between Arnold and Gates is only getting worse. Finally, Arnold says, if you're going to be this way, I'm just going to resign my position. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go back to Philadelphia. I'm going to talk to my big brother, George Washington, who you're trying to undermine anyway, and, I'll just be done with you. And Gates goes, there's the door, buddy, go. And so essentially, Arnold gave up his command. Gates took it. He's in charge. There's no question who's in charge. As the next Battle of Saratoga is forming, the second battle. And I want to read you what Burgoyne, John Burgoyne, said about that battle when he was back in England and testifying in front of the House of Commons. It was actually all written down. And he said, I have reason to believe my disappointment on that day. I'm going to switch to what actually happened. I have reason to believe my disappointment on that day proceeded from an uncommon circumstance in the conduct of the enemy. Mr. Gates, as I have been informed, had determined to receive the attack in his lines. Mr. Arnold, who commanded on the left, foreseeing the danger of being turned, advanced without consultation with his general, and gave instead of receiving battle. The stroke might have been fatal on Arnold's part had it failed. But confident I am upon minute examination of the ground, since that had Gates's idea been pursued, I should in a few hours have gained a position that in spite of the enemy's numbers would have put them in my power. Arnold, against orders, on his own, captive in his cabin, could not take it. The battle had been started. He could hear it. His army was out there. He was isolated and alone. He got on a horse that was not his, rode out to his left wing and said, boys, follow me. And he brought them to Bremen's Redoubt, where he was wounded again, and his horse shot out from under him and carried the day, by no better testimony than John Burgoyne's. Later on, a very fine historian, naval historian, Alfred Thayer Mahan, wrote and summed it up. So what does all this sequence of stuff mean? And he said, the little navy on Lake Champlain was wiped out, but never had any force, large or small, lived to better purpose or died more gloriously. That the Americans were strong enough to impose a capitulation on the British Army at Saratoga was due to the invaluable year of delay secured by their little navy on Lake Champlain. And I think that's true. Arnold was wounded. He was not at the surrender ceremony. When he was well enough, he was given the military command of Philadelphia, a job he was totally unsuited for, given him the job actually by George Washington. There he met beautiful 19-year-old Peggy Shippen, the most attractive woman in Philadelphia. And he wooed her. He actually wooed her with love letters he had written to a different woman the year before. It was an economy of scale. You didn't want to change those great words and just change the name on the top. And he really did that. It was really kind of funny. Anyway, he meets her, he woos her, they agreed that they're going to get married. She has become friends with John Andre, who has been with the British Army in Philadelphia the year prior to that. And so they are friends, connected, and becomes a major part of this postscripted story where Benedict Arnold ultimately does commit treason. Peggy is involved, John Andre is involved, and George Washington is the man betrayed. It's a great story. Someday I hope to be able to bring that to you. So the war ends. We know how that worked out. We're all very happy about that, even though today we do a lot of discussion about worrying about our democracy and our country and our founding principles. That's why I think this stuff is so important. And the part of this that, of course, I'm interested in particularly is the underwater cultural resource part. I was lucky enough to be trained as a professional diver, worked as a diver, came into the discovery of a new field called nautical archeology and felt like I had gotten home. And so finding the shipwrecks is the easiest part of any nautical archaeologist's job. Don't give us any credit for finding shipwrecks. Everybody can find shipwrecks. Go out with the equipment, run some transects, or just drop it in the water. You'll find shipwrecks if they're there. What you do after you find the shipwreck is complicated and important because they have arguably value, they're public resources, and we've got a long, if we learn from history, we've got a long track record of managing and loving these things to death. And I'll give you a good example of that. 1909, what was that? Tricentennial of Lake Champlain's, I won't use the term discovery, but the stumbling into Lake Champlain of a French explorer by the name of Samuel de Champlain. 300th anniversary, we got to celebrate, we got to commemorate. Let's get close to history. Gosh, are there any shipwrecks? They're so interesting. Are there any shipwrecks we might be able to find? Hey, there's that one off of Fort Ticonderoga. You can see it at low water. Let's get it. And this is the committee, the commission, for the 300th celebration at Fort Ticonderoga, patting themselves on the back for accomplishing this great thing. And what they thought they had found was, sorry, the R is gone, the Revolutionary warship Revenge. That was part of Arnold's fleet. And you notice there's a chicken wire fence around it. Well, some enterprising citizen decided they probably ought to burn it one night, so they didn't, and the fence went around to try to protect it. So finding it, managing it, those are important things. And it was put there so people could learn and get close to it. Unfortunately, without understanding the implications of wet wood recovery, this boat ultimately disintegrated. This is my team in 1984 at Fort Ticonderoga with John Kruger as our liaison. This actually is the woman I ended up marrying, my wife Annie. This is Kevin Chrisman, probably the finest nautical archaeologist in the country today. And we've just relocated the same boat, which actually was a Geoffrey Amherst 1759 British warship, the Duke of Cumberland, and the forest was growing up through the middle of it. We have cleared the forest so we can study the shipwreck that remains. And of course, it's in terrible condition. Did they love the boat? Did they want to do right to the boat? Sure they did. But that's a good example of a bad outcome. Outcome, the concept of outcome, is really important. So in our work, we try to keep that in mind. I mean, we do believe that in situ preservation is really the best first option. But it's not a commandment as part of the 10. It's not the 11th commandment. So you can say, unless there might be extenuating circumstances that allow you to revisit all of that. So what do we know about some of the boats involved with this episode and their outcomes? So this is the Royal Savage. Colonel Lorenzo Haglund didn't find it. He was brought to it by some local kids who used to swim on it. They knew where it was. They brought him to find the warship. He found it. He raised it. This boat has had a very circuitous route, happily for the last 10 years, now at the Navy shipyard in Washington, undergoing study and conservation. It's becoming a good outcome. For a while, it sat in a bad storage facility in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which had bought these pieces and parts and the artifact collection, which was extraordinary, to help with a Civil War National Museum they were hoping to build in Harrisburg. Well, they built the Civil War Museum, and somebody realized, well, what does this have to do with that? And so it sat in bad storage until it was rescued by the Navy. And then there's the famous Philadelphia. Sank 1 hour after the fighting stopped from damage. Same Colonel Haglund, who was a salvage engineer, educated at the Plattsburgh base. He was one of the officers that got trained here and went to war. He then became a professional salvage man for Merritt Chapman Scott. He knows how to do this stuff. He brings with him William Lilja, probably the best commercial diver operating in the world at the time, to help him find the boat. You know the technology they used to find the boat? Not the sonars that we have been so lucky to be able to use. They didn't use sonar, they used a wire stretched between two boats, dragging along the ground till they snagged it. Well, they snagged a lot of stuff before they found the Philadelphia, but they eventually snagged it, and there it was, sitting on its bottom, with its mast still up, its 3 cannons still in place, everything there untouched. And of course, you find it, you raise it. That was the ethic. And so for the next 25 years, I should point this out. The boat was raised, and Colonel Haglund was asked by an attentive news crew, so, Colonel Haglund, you've raised the boat, and it's intact, and it looks terrific, and it's so exciting. What are you going to do with it? Good question. Well, let's see. I'm going to try to give it away to the people at Ticonderoga, to the people at Crown Point. Somebody's going to want it. And that exercise did not work. Nobody wanted the boat. And so Colonel Haglund became its caretaker and devoted his life to it for the next 25 years, until he passed. And when he passed, he had made arrangements for the boat to go to the Smithsonian Institution, which was building its new National Museum of American History. And it's really kind of cool. They sent up a boat builder from Maryland, James Richardson, who built a packing crate made of white oak to protect the boat for the trip. And that, you're not looking at the boat, you're looking at the packing crate. And this boat went by water all the way to Washington, where it was installed in the National Museum of American History, which is where it's been ever since, and annually seen by literally multi-million people a year who learn the story of what happened here through that boat. I think it's terrific. I would not move it. These guys, Harold Ellis and his buddy here, spent the next 10 years documenting every bolt, plank, everything there was to back engineer from the original, they did. They created a set of plans that is probably the most extraordinary and detailed I've ever seen. And I had made friends with some of the curators there, and one of them, Dr. Philip Lundenberg, who is a world-class historian and I'm proud to say was a mentor of mine. When I talked to him about building replicas, because we had built a bateau early on, and I said, I've been thinking about, maybe using these extraordinary plans to build a full-size operational replica. He said, great idea. I will get you plans. I will get you the rare endorsement from the Smithsonian Institution for your project, but I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Build it slowly, because people will enjoy the process of watching what you do. And I went, wow, I would have done it differently. Thank you for that. And that's what we did. We built it slowly. We built it exactly as the plans presented it. We did not try to improve it. We even copied things we knew were mistakes. We built a clone. That was our goal. And we involved kids, school groups, elders, you name it. The boat has a magic of its own. The process has a magic of its own. And then we launched it on August 18th, 1991, and I've included a quote from your Senator Stafford, who gave one of the keynote talks there. And I wish I could say that he said, the lake should be a bridge and not a barrier, because he was talking about New York and Vermont. But I'm not sure if he said should be or is. And I was trying to be accurate, so I just took the one I thought it was. But I had to give you that little disclaimer. But he set the tone. We're all in this valley together. Let's work together. And so we had 4,000 people there. They're all connected to the event. And then we take the boat out and put it through technical trials as a watercraft. We learned everything except for sinking it. Well, actually, we did sink it a couple of times at the dock. But that's what, when you build something that's faithfully accurate, you get a chance to do that kind of experimental archaeology. So we learned that these were terrible watercraft. They were great gun platforms. You put 3 heavy guns on a flat-bottom boat and bring it into battle. That's what it was built for. Not to be smooth, not to handle heavy weather. We traveled it around the lake for 2 years and then brought it to the museum, where it serves as the classroom for everybody who came. And we I can't tell you the tens of thousands of school kids that went through the program to learn about the Battle of Valcour Island and Revolutionary War history on the deck of that boat. It was so effective. And then, some years later, we had another way to get into the story, and that is the Valcour Bay Research Project. So I, became a student of archaeology, and I was totally taken with the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand, and, a frenetic land engagement, people here, relief columns there, victims over there. And so they studied it. They studied the letters, the surviving accounts, the accounts of the rescuers who came too late. And they created what they thought was the Battle of Little Bighorn, what happened there. And then an archaeologist came to the site, and he used the spatial relations of things to also interpret the battle with the primary sources, and my gosh, it was slightly different and more accurate when you put the two lenses together, archaeology and history as the lens to your time machine. And so I was thinking, boy, someday it would be really great if we could try to do that on a scattered underwater battlefield. And I'm proud to tell you that Ed Scollin gave us the opportunity. So many of you know Ed. Back then he was on the New York State Police dive team, one of the finest divers I've worked with in my career. And Ed was testing out a new metal detector at Valcour Island, found a big hit, dug down, thought he might have found a cannon, called me. And we talked about it, and I suggested, probably this thing ought to be done, as a full-scale archaeological thing. You don't know what's under the cannon. Maybe there's a boat. Plus, you want to really think this through and get really have a plan, and Ed was all for that, and we created together a plan for the Valcour Bay Research Project. We had the 0 point, which was Ed's discovery, which did turn out to be not just a cannon, but a cannon that clearly had exploded sometime. Finding an exploded cannon there doesn't mean that cannon exploded during the battle. They might have used it for ballast, because that's what they did. But it was not just a cannon, it was a cannon that had come to grief while it was being fired or tested. And we did a number of things. One is we got a permit to do it as an archaeological project. We brought in a bunch of our folks from the community as well as from the museum. This is our boat operator, Dr. Dick Heilman, who made this project possible, Roger Harwood and his logistical support. And more importantly, by the time we were done, I'll just point out, these were all the bottom squares that we examined over our time period there. I'm particularly proud, not just of the amount of territory we looked at, but that 51 individuals participated. We recruited people from the region who might otherwise have not necessarily appreciated the historic value, the reason we do this carefully. And so they became part of our survey. We had 43 participating divers, 1,317 dives. That's a lot of work. And I still think that this project is really a landmark and a prototype for what might be done in other places. And so I'm very proud of this. And we had help from everybody. Everybody wanted to participate in some fashion. In 2001, it was the 225th anniversary of the American Revolution, and the National Park Service had a seminar encouraging people in the field to think about things they might do that might captivate the public's imagination about the American Revolution. So we said, well, that's a good excuse. We want to get this and some of the other. We found thousands of objects. We recovered about 25. And we used this as our opportunity. And because this is a pretty significant logistical operation, we had the support of the Coast Guard out of Burlington, lots of local divers, and we got this cannon ready for even a bigger event. How many of you joined us on the day this happened in 2001? We recovered this. We actually did it in a pretty ridiculous way. We brought a ferry boat out to the site and put 300 people aboard to witness it, citizens. Half from New York, half from Vermont. Senator Hillary Clinton, Senator Patrick Leahy, I've looked at these images. Some of you might recognize yourselves, but we got Frank Pabst in the back, was there. It's an all-star group of people, and we shared this experience where we actually brought that anchor, the cannon aboard for people to experience for the first time. Now, a cannon that had exploded is really an interesting object, but it's just an object. The cannon can speak a little bit, but not really. I don't know whose boat it was on. I don't know what the circumstances were. I don't know why it's there. And that's why the historical research is so important. And we had an army of researchers at the time working to figure out what gunboat we had found. And one of those researchers was a guy by the name of George Quintel. Gifted, talented, and so dedicated. And he found the keys that unlocked the mystery of the origin of this cannon. It had been on the gunboat New York on Lake Champlain.
Memento Mori. This monument is erected to the memory of Lieutenant Thomas Rogers by Mrs. Molly, the South Dakota. He was killed by the splitting of a cannon on the Lake Champlain on the 11th day of October, 1776. In the Continental Army, in the service of his country, and in the cause of liberty, aged 26 years and 9 months.
So I've been doing this work for a long time. Nothing has ever moved me or convinced me that this stuff is just important. This is a stone monument by the wife of the guy who was killed by the explosion of that cannon, serving his country and in the cause of liberty. I think that's profound, and I'm delighted to have been part of the program that found it. We put all those objects together in a traveling exhibit, and we went to Thomas Rogers' hometown in Massachusetts and did a program down there. We've been to the Saratoga battlefield. We've been to, and plan to come back to, the Clinton County Historical Museum. And so we're very, very pleased and proud of the outcome here so far. And then, of course, we all know that the lake has recently been invaded by an aquatic nuisance, many of them, but in our case, the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels are of great interest to us. When we knew they were coming, when we knew they were here, actually, and that they would be expanding their colonization on shipwrecks, we put forward that we wanted to as fast as we could, now that we had sonar and GPS and all the good equipment, let us go and systematically examine the entire bottom of Lake Champlain and find and study the shipwrecks before they're totally encrusted, and then, of course, before we worry that they may be damaged. So we geared up to do that. We used the RV Neptune for the whole project. Fred Fayette, Peter Baranko, two of the very principal people in the discovery team. We could not have done this survey without these two guys. Peter was the navigator, laid out every single line by hand that was run. He's also the finest historian that I've ever worked with on Lake Champlain. And Freddie was the master mariner that ran every single mile of the 6,000 plus that we ran over those 10 years. And we went and we used side scanning sonar to survey the bottom. We found 80 new shipwrecks. Most of them were commercial boats because that was the biggest user of the lake over time. But we also wondered about that missing gunboat that we thought went to the bottom, but we had no real conclusive evidence that it stayed there or that it wasn't somehow recovered at some point. In the second year of our survey, we found this sonar image of something that was clearly not a canal boat. And we went and did an exploratory dive to see what we had before we brought up a lot of ROV equipment and what have you. And I'm proud to tell you that this was what we saw when we finally got to the bottom. A completely intact gunboat with a cannon still in place in the bow, its mast still standing full height. A few artifacts showing above the mud, but we believe most of the objects will be well preserved within the mud of the hull. So I've said it before, it wasn't really easy, but the relatively easy part is finding the boats. Now the daunting task of managing it, and we're in the 27th year of trying to do due diligence to do this right. Well, it's a public resource. We had to announce it to the public. We did not announce anywhere along the way the location, just that it had been found, and it's a connection to the Battle of Valcour Island, the Revolutionary War, the formative years of the nation. Senator Patrick Leahy was our keynote speaker, and you see the rest of the team. The Manleys, geologist from Middlebury College, Peter is hidden behind them, Freddie Fayette. And in 18 months of focused research with contributions from George Quintel and an army of researchers, we were able to determine, without a lot of doubt, that this boat, which we had been calling the missing gunboat for 18 months, was in fact the gunboat Spitfire. And we're now totally, we know that that's true. So we've got this boat on the bottom of Lake Champlain. It's a living legacy and connection to the time period. We worry about the mussels. What will the mussels do? Will they simply obscure the view like this? This is actually in Lake Ontario, 300 feet of water, an American warship, the Hamilton. I want to go back one slide if I can. You notice there's a human skull right there. So you're seeing a vessel. We know the context. We know that many people died in this sinking, and we're getting some useful information. Now we go fast forward to 20-odd years. That's the same boat in 300 feet of water with quagga mussels on it. And that piece of human remains is no longer even visible. So to do our due diligence, over the 24 years, we created a new biological and materials study with the University of Vermont. This is Dr. Mary Watson, a really fine marine biologist. And we designed a survey, a study, to put materials that mimic the shipwrecks, white oak, white pine, wrought iron in pre-measured, weighted amounts, and we let them get colonized. And we let them get colonized over time. We had 6 settlement tables on 6 different sites at 6 different depth ranges in 6 different parts of the lake. And I'm here to tell you that the results are not good. Zebra mussels, and we believe quagga mussels, create a microenvironment between themselves and the hull that degrades iron 25 times faster than in a non-zebra mussel environment. And so we believe that these boats will be radically destabilized. And so we're faced back with the management challenge, which I say is really, that's the complicated part. Here's the boat. Here's where it is. This is what it looks like as we speak here today. It's got some exposures. The mast stands full height. They fish here. Some of our team are extremely worried that someday we'll come back here to inspect and the mast will be wrenched out of position or even broken. So it's not a perfectly stable environment that it's in. And so it's allowed us, for the first time in my career, to recommend serious consideration of recovery of this boat. We know how to do that. It's not easy. It's complex. It's expensive. It's a highly engineered event. But I'm recommending we look at the concept of recovery, conservation in a specially adapted space to conserve this boat correctly over time. We know how to do that, and we know what the stages are. We know how to build it. And then, without knowing where it would be, but also pre-selecting, once the conservation was done, have a facility that can serve as a public new museum to tell this national story. One of the things that I've added to the matrix of consideration, because I've done so much work on the military vessels of Lake Champlain, is we clearly want to exhibit and interpret, obviously, the Spitfire and connect the public with that story. But we also have the opportunity to take the Battle of Plattsburgh Bay from 1814, an underappreciated contribution to the nation, and we have the opportunity to interpret that in the same space. And I'm proposing that the exhibit facility be designed to do just that. And I'm also recommending that it happen where the history took place. Clinton County, New York. Where? I don't know. But someplace, for example, to say, would the air base, would the college, would someplace that's accessible, and from its vantage point, you can look to the south and see where the Battle of Valcour Island took place, or look to the north and see where the Battle of Plattsburgh took place. These are, in my opinion, extraordinary opportunities to connect the community and future generations with a real history that really happened with real people who sacrificed and participated. I will also say, as a footnote, there's another opportunity here for the archeologists in the room and the people who know and have worked on these sites before. There is still an underwater battlefield at Valcour Island, and particularly at Plattsburgh Bay, that have not been fully studied. So the opportunity for ongoing research and training of students and archeologists is one of the potential values that I think could be served by this concept. Thanks, guys. Oh, that wasn't so bad. I thought I went off further.
It's your opportunity.
Yes, sir.
So, as a member of America's Future Generation, I was 11 years old when the World Trade Center fell, and I'm 34 years old now. I'm a Civil War reenactor. I just got into war reenacting as of last year. I believe that the Spitfire should be raised from the bottom of Lake Champlain because for members of my generation, and there are basically none of them in here except for the news personnel, it's an incredible resource to have that boat brought up from the dark waters of Lake Champlain and put into this community, because a lot of people, when they came up here for the eclipse, were writing there's nothing to do in Plattsburgh for young people to see or interact with. I mean, even though the museums are here and they're incredible resources, people didn't take advantage of them the way that they should have. So having that boat in this community would mean a lot, because it would be a huge draw for tourism here, because people could come up and physically see the boat, understand the history and the context of why and see it. So when she has children, she can pass the legacy of that to her kids. It would mean a lot more that it's here than lying at the bottom of the dam.
I agree. For a management person, I think what you said is true. And I have looked at several museums that have raised vessels, and I've looked at the implications. Historically, they've raised vessels and it's been a disaster. Recently, there are some examples that you might say, well, that's a pretty good outcome. Because first and foremost, the question I have to ask is, what is the very best thing for the resource? Okay? And so I have managed to believe that because of the threats to the site, that it's okay to walk down the road of recovery and at least try it on for size. And I think we could do that. I think we have the technical skills to do that. And I agree that it would probably be, I will even say it, a major potential positive impact to the community. But I can't lead with that because that's not why I would do it. However, I totally agree that that is just, when you start to think about what's the value here, what's being served, what you articulated with your 2-year-old niece, I'm right with you.
I've been to the Hunley Museum.
The Hunley Museum would be one of them. The Vasa, for those of you who use the internet, go look at the Vasa Museum in Sweden. And let me quickly disclaimer, you won't see the Spitfire. You'll see a small boat next to the Vasa that's about the size of the Spitfire. The Vasa is 6 stories tall and the most extraordinary piece of wooden sculpture you'll ever see in your life. That museum, it just so happens, sees, I think, 1,300,000 people a year now. That was a few years ago, so it's probably more. It produces a surplus, pays for all of its operations, all of its staff. This is directly from the executive director of the museum that I was interviewing, and produces a surplus that goes to help support the other Swedish national museums. That's not why we would do it, but we can't, if it's true, then we can't, it's just part of the matrix of what you figure out. And so I think that's important to look at that. And interestingly, the Vasa, which is probably the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in a building. Putting a boat like that in a building is really framing it. The Vasa Museum's history sank on its maiden voyage. It was poorly designed by the king. They interpret all of that. Great, terrific. This boat fought at the Battle of Valcour Island under the command of Benedict Arnold, with a cast of characters that are important to understand, including, especially, Lieutenant Thomas Rogers. So I think there's some really high values to be served there. Thank you very much for your comment.
All right, I have a question. If this project were to get going soon, what's the timetable? What could the people in this room look for points of progress, raising, starting to conserve, finishing conserving, opening a new museum?
Realistically, if I had to just throw in a number, I'd say 15 years. And I wouldn't do, here's the thing, you know, we're coming up to a 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. It might be a factor in some of these discussions. It should be. It's not determinative, but it's another variable of, well, why would we? Why would we do it now? Why would we spend all that money? It's going to be a hugely expensive undertaking. And part of the way these projects fail is the people who are proponents lie and lowball. Oh, you know, $50 and we got it all covered. You know, it'll be great. This person will come in, this business, and they absolutely destabilize the boat, recover the boat before they're ready, and the boat suffers. And we know that, so we've learned from history we're not going to do that. This is going to be a long process. It can't be rushed. Several years ago, I was talking with some people and thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could do it for 2026? Can't be done. Can't raise this boat that fast. There's too many due diligent details and building and assembling of a team and figuring things out that has to be done to do it right. You can't do it too quickly. You have to do this right. This project has the potential to be a world-class case study that's wonderful for the community, or a total bust. Once we decided, if we decide we're going to do it, the next big thing is that. Okay, well now we've got what we asked for. Are we really going to be able to pull this off? Have we got the resources? Have we got the support? Have we got the community support? Have we got consensus? And are we able to assemble a team that would do this? I've reached out to some of the people that I know who are, in my opinion, people who you'd want on a team like that. And I haven't said I'm recruiting. I've just said we're talking the talk. It's not happening yet. It's still a concept being discussed with the community and agencies and organizations and people who ultimately will collectively make a decision. I'm just trying to make the most accurate and compelling, I'm trying to make a compelling case as I see it. It's not smoke and mirrors, it's not embellishment, it's really as accurately as we can do it, present the case and the variables. Yes?
I think it's been a very interesting and informative presentation, but there's so much there that we can't retain. Is there going to be a possibility to get this, because I see people recording all of this, are we going to be able to get a copy of that like on a disc? Or, I'm just saying, there's just so much information. It'd be nice to be able to look at it again.
Let me tell you, there's some really good books that are already out, and you'll be able to get them through the Clinton County Historical Association.
But they're not promoted by Art Cohn, who presented this.
Well, I can't speak for the films. I think they are, in fact, going to be available. I think that's their reason for doing it. So I'd be happy to let you guys chime in if you like.
Yeah, this will be on Hometown Media YouTube channel. We've got 12,000 videos there, this will be one more.
And
A very big one. And ultimately, PBS will post it online, the entire presentation.
Won't be the full one, but
Channel 11.
I know that the talk from last year is up on YouTube, so that's what we will follow to see.
who owns the vessel? Great question. Wow. I believe that the vessel is owned by the people of the United States, citizens. They have a collective ownership interest in it, as does future generations. Whose jurisdiction it is to manage the vessel, I would argue, is an evolving science, or it's actually evolving law and public policy. And I would argue there are two agencies of jurisdiction. The federal government passed the Sunken Military Craft Act in 2004. And they are, by legislation, the presumptive manager of military craft, whether in American waters or around the world. If they went to the bottom as American vessels, they are still American vessels unless formally abandoned or given up. The other jurisdiction is the state of New York. The state of New York has been managing archaeological resources and underwater resources for more than 50 years. We always applied for our work for 2 permits from the Navy and the New York State Museum. And 10 days ago, we applied for yet a NUX permit to go back to the Spitfire this year and do our annual inspection under permit, and we applied to both agencies. And so we're proposing a partnership, if you will, by the Navy representing the feds, by the state of New York, actually represented here tonight by Daniel McKay, to do the right thing by the boat. I hope that answers the question. Yes?
Art, would there be a local salvage team to do this, or would it be a contract team, or what would you put together?
I would presume it will be an outside contract team of deep water engineers. But before we need to do that, here's what we need to do. Here's what I'm advocating we do, and I've been advocating this for a while, and it hasn't happened. But it should this year. I'm advocating 4 studies get commissioned. A recovery study by an ocean engineering company. We've been in conversations with some. A conservation study talking about process and physical plant, which have already been, those conversations at least have been all preliminary. A business plan study. So what does this really look like? Cash in, cash out. Let's be realistic. We need to produce an accurate budget. And lastly, what does the final interpretive center look like, and where is it? So those 4 things need to get done. Those things could get commissioned and resulted in a year and a half. And that's, to me, the due diligence of, is this really the right idea? You know, the engineering guys may say, well, this boat won't hold together. You can't raise it like that. I think we've got some experience with it, but we need to know that. And we need to know the timetable and the costs involved and the technology that's going to come to bear. And right now, we don't have that all planned. Would there be local involvement? Yes. But this, first and foremost, we're doing what's right for the boat.
Art, I've got how high is the mast on that roughly?
About 50 feet off the bottom.
About 50 feet.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I'm going to hang out for a little while. Want to visit with some of you, and certainly happy to take. Oh, Jerry.
Can I just say?
Yes.
We will, Clinton County Historical, will get the information from the people who are here filming tonight, and Julie will put it on our Facebook page where people can access it, and the information will be at the museum. You can call, and Helen or somebody there will be able to tell you who was here tonight, so that you can be able to watch the presentation again. Okay? And thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Clinton County has been like a... Thank you.